And on air. All right, welcome to the Stretch Zero podcast. This is the first edition of the podcast, and we just launched our new site called Stretch Zero, stretchzero.com. I'm here with the two guys who started it with me, Russell Peddle and Brett Weisband. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, man. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Sorry, Russ.
It's okay.
So we're going to use this podcast kind of to talk about all sorts of basketball-related topics throughout the season, with the premise being that we really like to focus on kind of the statistical and analytical side of basketball. We actually all met and all currently write at numberfire.com, which is really focused on the statistical and kind of advanced stats analysis of basketball, particularly the NBA. So this website is kind of like a like a side project, but it's still really focused on heavy stats and stuff like that. So if you like that, then you will enjoy this podcast and our stuff. Thank you for checking it out. We're going to start off talking about the NBA offseason and all the craziness. Had a lot of movement, including the best player in the world, which we'll get to talk about the Cavs in a second. But Russ, your take on the offseason, who are your kind of winners, losers, best, worst?
Okay. Well, obviously, the Cavs made a big move, but like you said, we'll talk about that later. After that, I got to say, I really liked what the Mavs did. They threw a lot of money at Chandler Parsons, and it cost them a lot to replace like Sean Marion there at the small forward, but I like that. I like that move. They brought back Tyson Chandler to bring back that championship defense from 2011. They added a couple, middling point guards, Jameer Nelson and Raymond Felton, and brought back Devin Harris, and got some depth as well with Aminu and Richard Jefferson. Like they added a lot of pieces. Like it'll be interesting to see how they all fit together, but I really like what they did. Other than that, the Wizards bringing in Paul Pierce. Thought that was a good move, a way to deal with losing Ariza, and a couple underrated moves too. Chris Humphries and Juan Blair, and probably the Hornets. I mean, they brought in Lance, so there you go, and Marvin Williams. So I think those are the Wiz, the Mavs, the Hornets. Probably my top three off seasons. What about you, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but I had those same three teams as my top three. I absolutely love what Dallas did. I think they might be the most improved team in the West. Last year they had to play Dirk with the bench units a lot, mostly because they had a lot of older guys and they couldn't really keep their starters all on the floor for long stretches. So Dirk had to kind of carry the bench units, and now they've got Parsons, who averaged, I think, 36 minutes a game last year. He's kind of taking Vince and neither of those guys could play heavy minutes last year, just because they're both in their upper 30s. So I think that's actually going to be a really good move for them, despite the $15 million price tag. And I've written about the Hornets. I kind of had a crush on them last year. Something about them kind of drew me in. The way they kind of stuck together, a top-tier defense without any, obviously it's kind of tough to build a real good defense around Al Jefferson, but I think, adding Lance on the wing and adding Marvin Williams there will definitely help their cause in that, to make that defense even a little tighter. And I totally agree on the Wizards, for probably the first time in franchise history, they didn't completely blow it in free agency. They probably, in the past, you would think that the Wizards would go ahead and throw a huge pile of money at Trevor Ariza, and instead, they let him walk when it got a little too rich for their blood, which, you wouldn't expect. And the Gortat signing, really fair deal. That probably won't even look bad until maybe he's, 4 years into it. So you got to kind of applaud them for finally getting an offseason right, which, with Grunfeld at the helm, you kind of never really expected to see that coming.
Yeah. So you guys both like the Mavericks, which I agree. I think bringing in Parsons was a big move for them, and getting their rim protector in Tyson Chandler as well. But my main concern with them is their point guard situation. I know, Russ, that you had written about this on Number Fire, I guess a week or two ago, kind of with these new guys, with Raymond and the guys that they brought in, and losing Jose Calderon, who statistically is one of the the best shooters in the NBA that we've as far as efficiency wise that we've seen in a long time, and kind of what he brought alongside Dirk. Do you really think that they can contend in the West and get a couple rounds deep without like a solid point guard?
I would say that they can. I mean, I think the moves they made, I would put them up. I'm not quite ready to put them up in the OKC, San Antonio, LA Clippers tier quite yet, but I think they can make a move, and at the very least a second round team could give a team a run for their money. And the thing with Calderon, where I'm kind of like, I think that they can do okay if by bringing in these other guys, because Calderon wasn't the same guy in Dallas that he was in Toronto. I'm not really counting that short stint in Detroit, but his conversion into a guard that was doing less of the passing and was a really dead-eye shooter, a lot of that came from being in the system that he was in and having Dirk and Monte Ellis eating up a lot of the possessions, and then he was basically just open for a lot of shots. His 3-point percentage last season, I think it was around 45-ish or something like that. He never hit that in Toronto. He was mostly in the late 30s, might have touched 40 once or twice. And I think that was a product of where he was, and he was passing the ball less. He's a great point guard, and he's very underrated, but I mean he's on the wrong side of 30. He's 32 or 33, and he has a great assist to turnover ratio and all that stuff. But I think you can fill someone in, you can put someone into that spot. And in the article you mentioned, I think for me, Jameer Nelson profiles as the best person to do that. I mean, Devin Harris hasn't had a very productive season in a couple of years. He's obviously the best defender out of the three, but all three of them are kind of in that 30-year-old range and aren't quite at the best they were when they were all-stars or almost all-stars. But I think Jameer Nelson could fit in that role. I mean, he's the best three-point shooter out of the three, and I think put him in a situation where he can kind of hang out on the perimeter and get open shots. I mean, you're looking at even easier than what Calderon had. Probably the situation will be, because they're going to have not only Dirk and Monte, but now you're adding Chandler Parsons to that, who's a very good scorer as well, and you're not giving up a lot on defense because Jose Calderon's a terrible defender, so Jameer Nelson or even Ray Felton aren't going to be that much worse.
Yeah, I think we might even be underselling Monte Ellis a little bit here. Obviously, when he was in Milwaukee for that year and a half, and even towards the end of his Golden State tenure, the advanced stats really hated him. He was a high usage, low efficiency guy, and he kind of turned that around a little bit last year. I think his effective field goal percentage was the highest it had been since 2010 maybe. His true shooting percentage was up there too, might have been one of the highest of his careers. So he was one of the guys that was running the pick and rolls with Dirk as opposed to Calderon, and he did a great job from what I saw. I watched them not all that closely, but enough to really get a feel for them, and I loved that pick and roll that they run, and a lot of the looks that Calderon got were kick outs. The defense collapsed on Dirk when he popped out or rolled, or they collapsed on Monte when he came around the screen. That created those wide open looks. So those guys, Felton is, he is what he is, and Jameer Nelson is, kind of the same thing, but they're going to get open looks that they might not have had in their previous stops because of the gravity of Dirk's shooting and Monte's penetration ability. And even playing with Calderon last year, Ellis still had, I'm looking at it now, he had 24.8 assist percentage. So he's pretty good as a distributor, even though he is the nominal shooting guard, I guess. They basically ran a dual point guard lineup last year. So he's going to have plenty of ball handling responsibility to kind of offset any downgrade that they'll be getting from Calderon to Nelson and Felton and Harris, if you want to throw them in there. So I think really, it is definitely their weak spot, but I think just having Ellis there, a guy who played point guard, who has played point guard for stretches in his career, it'll kind of help balance that out, even if they are taking a little bit of a loss there.
Yeah. What I appreciate about the Mavs was that they kind of went after their guy being Parsons, and they gave him an offer sheet, and turns out that the Rockets didn't match, and which is kind of interesting because we have a couple of really good guys in Bledsoe and Greg Monroe from Detroit, who are restricted free agents, but no one's even tried to sign them on an offer sheet and at least make the other teams match. And then you have advantages there because you can eat up the other team's cap space and all that stuff. But do you guys have any thoughts on why no one seems really interested in giving these guys a max offer at least?
I mean, there's some precedent here. Last summer, Nikola Pekovic sat on the market until late August, even though he's a relatively young guy that showed that he can handle major minutes, and he sat there until late August or maybe even early September, and he ended up getting a fair contract from the Timberwolves, where he'd been. So I mean that might happen with these two. I know there's reports about Bledsoe being unhappy with the way the Suns have treated him, so who knows what's going to come out of that. But we've seen clear signals from the Suns at least that they're planning to bring back Bledsoe at any cost, but they're just far away on that offer sheet or the offer from them, and just seems like just the prospect of losing that flexibility for a couple days has kind of scared off any prospective suitors for Bledsoe, just because they're under the impression that the Suns are going to bring him back no matter what. And you can stretch it out. From what I've seen, you've got 3 days to match, and then you've got another 48 hours for physicals or something like that. I could be wrong. We'd have to check that. But that ties up cap space and any room that you have available for as many as 5 days. And whether or not you're kind of putting the Suns in a bind by giving Bledsoe an offer sheet, or whether you're putting yourself in a bind even with how few free agents there are sitting out there, it seems like that's been reason enough for teams not to go after Bledsoe.
Right.
The Monroe situation, though, I have no idea what's going to happen there at this point. I know I think Russell, you wrote about that, right?
Yeah, I did. Just basically how god awful that trio was last year, and of the trio I'm referring to being Greg Monroe, Josh Smith, and Andre Drummond. And I know I speak for all three of us that we're huge Drummond fans, and we don't want to see his growth stunted. And I like Monroe. Monroe's I don't want to call him a one-trick pony, but I mean he's maybe he's a two-trick pony. He can he posts up and he grabs some rebounds. His defense obviously needs some work and all that, but I like those two together, and I like the idea of them growing together. Josh Smith is obviously the odd man out, and that's what I wrote about. Bra, you posted something on our website, the Stretch Zero, there today about Josh Smith and just being an all-time terrible chucker, just putting up a lot of shots and shooting at such a poor percentage. And I think that he's the odd man out, especially when you look at Detroit and what they have with Stan Van Gundy coming in. And you know what? I don't hate their offseason either, other than the Monroe limbo thing. They basically added some decent depth when you look at DJ Augustine, what he did with the Bulls last year, and especially in the the playoffs. He was a major player, and Jody Meeks did okay in LA, and Caron Butler's well past his prime, but he's a decent 9th or 10th guy off the bench. And apparently Coldwell Pope had a really good summer league, so they could be okay. They gotta get rid of that logjam up front, and I think I'm kind of worried for them that they're not tying up Monroe, and that they're there was some rumors about Josh Smith possibly being linked to a trade to Sacramento, because of course Sacramento just wants all the bad contracts and all the statistical the people who kill advanced stats like Rudy Gay. And can you guys imagine Josh Smith and Rudy Gay on the same team? Anyway, they're going after that, and if I were the Pistons, I'm like, yep, take them. What do you want?
Right. Yeah.
I'm amazed that didn't happen when it was rumored, but who knows what's going to happen there. And I think Monroe and Bledsoe, that whole thing, restricted free agency is a funny thing altogether, because it's fun to watch and to see if teams match and stuff, but it gets kind of depressing when a guy clearly doesn't want to be with a team and gets forced to be there. Like it's one thing when you're drafted and you're just happy to be there, but I find it's another thing when you're like 4 years into your career and you know you like in the Bledsoe situation where he feels like he like apparently this situation is really bad. Like he's not happy with them. Like apparently it's irreparable. Like they're not gonna like. And what's going to end up happening is he's either going to have to accept some kind of qualifying offer, or he's going to sign somewhere else, and then they're just going to keep him anyway because he's an asset. And like it's weird that that's going to mess with kind of the chemistry that they kind of put together last season. And he's a budding star, you know. Like I really can't figure out why one of the Lakers and teams like that, and even the Rockets, like when they struck out on everyone, why they didn't throw an offer sheet his way. I mean, I know the Suns said they'd match, but I don't know. It's a weird situation. I like restricted free agency in general. That kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth at times because I feel like people don't end up where they should. And I'm all about them having a choice where they can go if they're not satisfied. They should be able to leave. I know it's early in their career, and it helps players. You know, it helps teams. You build on something and develop their draft choices without them bolting too early. But you know, situations like this with Monroe and with Bledsoe make it kind of like make me uncomfortable, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. It kind of the Bledsoe situation kind of reminds me a little bit of Eric Gordon, which is funny because you know it's another former Clipper there. You know, when he had his restricted free agency a couple years ago, he had an offer sheet from the Suns that he signed and made it really clear that he wanted to be in Phoenix and didn't want the Pelicans to bring him back. Were they the Pelicans then? Yeah, I guess they were.
They were still the Hornets, then, I think.
So yeah, he made it clear he wanted to be in Phoenix, and you know they ended up bringing him back, even though he didn't want that. You know, the deal, even though it was a max deal, he didn't want that from New Orleans, and you know they ended up bringing him back, and he's barely played since then. And you know, I mean, I'm sure the Hornets / Pelicans are looking back at that, kicking themselves now that they've got this untradeable contract. And, you know, Bledsoe, I mean, he does have injury concerns. You know, last year was his first season playing as a starter, and what did he play? I think only like 43 games or something like that. So you can see why they're a little far apart. You know, he wants this max deal, but he's never proven that he can play a full season as a starter. You know, he's got injury concerns, and a meniscus is nothing to fool with. You know, Dwayne Wade had the meniscus injury when he was a lot younger, and, you know, now you look at his knees at 32, and he can, you know, he's barely a capable player some nights. So you can kind of see why the Suns are feeling a little hesitant to give him that five years, $80 million that he's reportedly asking for. But you know, it is kind of turning into a toxic situation, it seems like, and you really worry because I mean that Phoenix team, I think we can all agree that they were probably the most enjoyable team to watch in the league last year. So you definitely don't want to see them hurt by some kind of disagreement like this. You know, obviously Bledsoe's got to look out for himself, and the Suns have to be careful with future flexibility so they don't, you know, handicap themselves down the line. But I mean, personally, I don't want to see that team broken up or splintered apart in any way, just because they're so enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, I agree. So if you're another team, though, you kind of like realize that this is a toxic situation. You gotta step in and make an offer, right? So like here, the reasons that a team, you know, wouldn't want to give an offer to a restricted free agent. So the first one is that, you know, that if you know that they're going to match, then it ties up your cap space for a couple of days, like Brett said, and then you can't, you know, make offers to other people. But at this point, I mean, it's almost August. Like, you know, Lance Stevenson's off the market. Like, a bunch of these guys are off the market, so it's not like all these unrestricted free agents are still hanging out. You got to worry about your cap space. Another one is that if you sign an offer and then Bledsoe signs back with the Suns, that he is a trade kicker for the next year, so he can veto whatever trade. The third one being that obviously if you make an offer and then the Suns sign him, then you are making sure that Bledsoe doesn't get to unrestricted free agency later. So, you know, you're taking the chance of giving him an offer sheet, but then if he signs it, then all of a sudden he's not on the market for another 3 years, so you kind of mess up your chances of signing him. But here's my thing, like what's stopping a team like the Bucks, who you know, have a couple really good young pieces in Giannis and in Jabari, who they drafted. They are not even close to the salary cap, so they have tons of room to kind of do whatever they want. And they're not going to sign him in unrestricted free agency. I mean, no free agent's going to go to Milwaukee anyway. So what's stopping a team like the Bucks kind of saying, oh, this is a toxic situation, and Bledsoe's not happy because he thinks he's deserved this amount. We're really only going to get a superstar free agent if we kind of poach him like this. And, you know, the worst case scenario, he signs with the Suns, and we weren't going to get him anyway, and it's not like they're really trying to get an unrestricted free agent right now. Like, I don't get why a team doesn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense for a team like the Bucks. I mean, I know the Sixers are super opposed to being good in any way whatsoever.
True that.
Like, well, you're right. I mean, like, why don't one of these teams go after him? Because at this point, there really is nothing to lose, especially for a team that, you know, wasn't planning on making a big splash in free agency. You know, that has cap room, is just kind of biding their time until their young guys develop. I mean, Bledsoe's 24 years old. So even if you are a rebuilding team, he's still, you know, an ascending player. He's not going to hit his peak for another couple of years. So It would make sense if you do have to max him out. You know, what do you have to lose? Like you said, Milwaukee really has. They're not a destination at all. You know, unless you're Jason Kidd, nobody's really angling to go to Milwaukee.
Exactly. So, all right, but yeah, so there's, you know, an idea for a team to do that, and you know, some teams kind of took risks this offseason, and you know, like the Mavericks, and it paid off. And I at least personally want the Bucks to take a risk, or some team like that just really needs like a good point guard, has a couple of good young pieces, and let Bledsoe kind of develop along with those guys. I'd like to see them take that risk. But there's a couple teams that took risks this offseason, like the Rockets. You know, when they, you know, ship off Lynn to the Lakers in a pick to get rid of him. They send Ashik to New Orleans to get space for Chris Bosh. You know, the Bulls are trying to make a run at Melo and completely swing and miss. So I'm assuming that probably maybe one of those two teams are on your worst of the offseason, Russ?
Well, I've got, I'd say my worst off seasons were, yeah, for sure the Rockets. But, I mean, I don't fault Daryl Morey for going for it. I think that's what got him where he is. That's what got him Dwight and James Harden. And the fact that he struck out, people are kind of like almost gloating about it and tearing him down. But he went for it, and it just didn't work out. Like, Bosh took the chance to get more money, more years, and stick in Miami where he's comfortable. And, you know, Melo ended up going back to New York because he could get more money and blah, 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 and make La La happy and all this stuff. But, yeah, I mean, they basically mortgaged off their depth, and they're with Trevor Ariza now, who, if you remember, the last time he performed as well as he did last season was also a contract year, and he signed he went to the Rockets and then stunk afterwards. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of their offseason. I like the fit of Ariza. I like Ariza on paper, based on last season. I like him at that price. But I mean, I can't even tell you who's coming off their bench when you beyond the starting five, which is, you know, fairly strong and one of the stronger ones in the league. But then after that, like, what are you doing, Monty Hunis, that Troy Daniels D-League kid?
Hey, he was good.
He was good, and he serves his purpose very well, of course. But yeah, I think they were kind of on the cusp of being. Last year, I felt like they were kind of like this mini contender that was just outside that whole Spurs, Clippers, Thunder thing, and I felt like they could kind of make a move at that. But I think after losing Parsons is a pretty big deal, and losing Lynn and Ashik, who are starting caliber players on other teams. Like, I mean, before they even got Harden, they signed those two as their big major signings of that summer before Harden fell in their laps. So, like, those players are still effective. Lynn's still an effective player. He's getting better each year, and Ashik, of course, is like a defensive force, and he was going to waste on that bench, and he wasn't happy. And, you know, like that. Just to kind of like backtrack a second, like talking about best off seasons, I look at a team like the Pelicans, and like adding Ashik on that front line with Anthony Davis, it just makes me drool. Like the rim protection, like they both face so many shots at the rim. They both, you know, the 48% range of shots allowed in that range, which is excellent, and they're going to shut people down. And if they can stay healthy, if like the Eric Gordons of the world, the Drew Holiday, Tyreek Evans, Ryan Anderson, if these guys can get healthy, I know it's asking a lot, but I mean, just adding the depth of Ashik, Salmons, and even Jimmer Fredette, who's like a dead-eye three-point shooter and who's been underutilized in his career so far. I know he's not great in a lot of other ways, and he's a defensive sieve, but shooting is worth something. You know what I mean? Like they put together a very interesting team, and I'm really looking forward to watching them. But anyway, the point I was getting to is the Rockets lost a lot of people, and I don't see what they're doing. So yeah, they're definitely on my list. I'd say the Pacers are on my list just for letting Lance walk, because their whole meltdown last year near the end of the season and going into the playoffs, and they kind of, they fell into the conference finals, but what was that really worth? And then to lose Lance, who was a big part of everything that they do. He was like one of their leading rebounders. He was their ball handler. He was one of their best scorers. He did a lot of creating off the dribble. He brought so much to that team, and on both ends of the floor. I saw someone mention on today, like, is Lance Stevenson like the best two-way shooting guard in the league right now?
I think you could probably make the argument for Klay Thompson over him, especially when you look at why the Warriors are reportedly not putting him in the love deal. I wrote about this a little bit. If it's his defense that apparently they're in love with even more so than his shooting. But I would probably take Lance over Klay just because of the ball handling factor that you mentioned. Lance was Indiana's best pick and roll guy last year. I mean, Paul George can't really dribble all that well. He's not a good passer. George Hill is not a threat to score at all. They kind of relied on Lance a lot to make things happen for them. And yeah, I mean, it's going to hurt, going to Rodney Stuckey. Stuckey has been, he's throughout his career, he's kind of been forgotten just because he plays in Detroit. But, his numbers, his rate stats, especially his per 36 numbers until last season, have been really consistent. I guess you can probably chalk that up to the radioactive mess that was the Pistons last year, and hope that he can bounce back. But he is nowhere near the two-way player Lance is. I don't know that Rodney Stuckey's ever played defense in his career. So, the Pacers definitely, I mean, if they had kept Lance, they're probably still the favorite in the East, even with LeBron on the Cavs. But now, they're going to be right in that mix, that 50 to 56 win range that, there's probably going to be another 3 or 4 teams that, are going to be challenging them there. So you kind of, it definitely hurts. And, I know Larry Bird did what he could to keep him there, but it was pretty clear that Lance just wanted out. And it's kind of hard to blame him. If it wasn't for Roy Hibbert being such a wreck in the second half of the season, even with that, Lance was still getting the finger pointed at him. There were chemistry issues, and, yeah, he was one of their best rebounders, but if you watched them and you read about what was going on, teammates weren't happy with him because he was just flying in there and stealing rebounds, which, you respect to a guard for crashing the boards like that, but, Roy Hibbert kind of makes his money by grabbing defensive rebounds and being a force there. So, kind of you can see how that would kind of splinter a locker room. So it definitely hurts to lose him, but who knows? It could end up being addition by subtraction if Lance really was being disruptive, like some reports have him at. But yeah, and going back to the Rockets, everybody seemed to take a lot of joy in Morey striking out, and the plan was solid. And Ariza, he is a good piece, but they did sacrifice. They gave up all of their assets basically to try and swing for the fences with Melo and Bosch, and they missed. So they of the playoff teams in the West, they got worse, and there's not a lot of teams that you can say that about. I don't think that were in the playoff bracket with them. I don't see any other teams that really blew this offseason like them in the West. So. Those two teams, they were both at the top, toward the top of their conference. They both had home court last season. I don't know. I mean, the Pacers should still be there, but I definitely don't see the Rockets, in the top 4 in the West this year, after, kind of giving up all of that depth. Another team, I know Russ touched on this earlier. I hated everything the Kings did this offseason. I think all of us here are big Isaiah Thomas fans, and, obviously there are concerns with him. He's not known as the best distributor, although his assist rates kind of point otherwise there. And Darren Collison, he's whatever. He's he did a nice job as a backup in Los Angeles. But look at the last time he had a full-time started the season as the point guard when he was in Dallas, I think 2 years ago, and he got benched for 400-year-old Mike James pretty shortly into the season. So that's really, I mean, for a team that has made it clear that by the time they move into their new arena, they want to be competitive. Letting a guy like Thomas walk, who ended up signing a very reasonable contract in Phoenix, letting him walk and replacing him with someone that's failed in his opportunities as a starter before, that hurts. And seeing them tied to Josh Smith, that makes less sense than letting Thomas walk. They've, even with, I know they picked up Gay, which was kind of panned at the time, Rudy Gay, that is, just because of his monstrous contract and his, pretty pitiful shooting numbers. But, they are clear, after this season, they got him to opt in for, I think, $19 million this year. But after this season, he walks and they've got that cap space. But Josh Smith, he still has 3 or 4 seasons left on his deal at, $14 million a year or something like that. And that's a tough pill to swallow for any GM. So I'm not really sure what the fascination with him is there. And once again, they made a first-round pick that kind of clashes with what they already have on the roster with Nick Stauskas. They drafted Ben McLemore last year, who seems like a phenomenal talent. He obviously struggled a bit last season shooting the ball and playing consistently on both ends of the floor. But Stauskas, I mean, they're going to play a similar role in the NBA. If you look at what they did in college, and it just doesn't make sense to draft another guy that plays the same position after investing, a top 10 pick in McLemore just the year before. It's kind of similar. It seems like before that they had the fascination with power forwards, and they were drafting them and trading for them and signing guys. And they're just continuing, even with the new ownership and new management there, they just continue to make zero sense at all.
Yep, I agree. Yep, the Kings, who knows what they're doing. And, Zach Lowe wrote that piece the other, I guess it was last week, on the Kings and kind of, what they were thinking and all that stuff. I mean, Boogie is great, but, yeah, they're just kind of a mess as far as the rest of their pieces. Who knows what they were thinking with Collison. They have these mystery defensive stats that no one really knows that, project him as a top-level defender. But I'm not sure exactly. One team that obviously, did the best of the offseason, if you get the best player in the world on your team in free agency, you would probably consider that probably the best of the offseason. That's the Cavs. So I kind of want to talk about that. If you guys want to talk about Love and Wiggins and all that debate, it's fine. It's been kind of discussed all over the internet past couple of weeks. But what do you guys kind of think about, like, the Cavs as they stand now? Like, obviously Love has not been traded, and we can debate, all night whether we think that, he is going to be traded or whether he should be traded, and kind of how Wiggins projects in the future and whether that's worth giving up for Love, all that stuff. But, as far as the Cavs stand now, they don't have Love. So what do you guys kind of think about their roster? And one thing that I was thinking about earlier today, kind of, what their roster looks like. It was just kind of like a what if. The Cavs took Anthony Bennett, and, he looked better in Summer League, and, he may turn out to be a good player. Kind of like the Shane Battier, like stretch four, can kind of, defend the four position, let LeBron, be the power four, but he can defend the four. But I was just thinking, Nerlens Noel last year had been, projected as the #1 pick forever. And then the Cavs get it, and then they surprise everyone in taking, Anthony Bennett first. But what if the Cavs had taken Nerlens Noel? Because that's kind of like what our biggest skepticism of the Cavs right now is that, LeBron and Wade were so good at protecting the rim that they didn't necessarily need a rim protector. But, as they sort of aged, and LeBron is, going to hit 30 in the end of December, and Wade was older, that they can't defend the rim from the wings with their athleticism as much. And Anderson Varejao can kind of do that in stints, but he is a lock to be injured for 20 games a year. So really, the defense is kind of the question mark for the Cavs. Like, what if they had taken Noel and just locked up their, like, all defensive rim protector center and paired him alongside LeBron. And then you were looking at Wiggins, LeBron, Kyrie, and Noel. Like, how crazy would that have been?
Don't go taking Nerlens away from my Sixers there, Brian.
They would be so good, though. They would be so good. You guys haven't beat anyway. Like, what? You guys are. You don't need them.
I'm so greedy, Sixers.
Yeah, for real.
I mean, that's such an interesting thing to think about, and I think that combination would be, we'd all be drooling over it. But I mean, of course, when you play the what-if game, of course, if they had gotten Nerlens Noel last year, maybe they would have done worse. And if they'd done worse, maybe they wouldn't have even gotten the first overall pick because they just lucked into it where they were. And anyway, like, they might not have gotten Wiggins that way, but I mean, like, either way, I think one thing, of course, as you mentioned, the biggest problem with the Cavs right now is the rim protection, and they're a young team, and they're not elite. Well, they're top team in the East, but they're not a shoe-in to the finals like we've been saying about the Heat for the last few years, just because they have LeBron James. Like, you need those additional pieces, and Kyrie Irving and Andrew Wiggins, as they stand right now, today, are not the Wade and Bosh of the last 4 years. So, I mean, they're not in a position where I think that they're probably not going to win it this year in the current construction, which is why I understand the go for love thing. I mean, I'm on the side of to keep Wiggins, and a big part of that is really just selfishly as a Canadian, I want Wiggins to become the best player he possibly can. I think he's going to do that under LeBron with his tutelage there. So, but it's, I get it. It's you got LBJ in his prime for a couple more years here now. Like, why not go for it now? And I think a move needs to happen. Love would be a great addition. Obviously, he's like one of the best players in the league. It doesn't address their biggest need, though, which is a defensive big. So I think it makes them really good, and obviously makes them a title contender as well, and all that stuff. But I don't think it makes them 100% shoe-in, just because you still have the Spurs, the Clippers, the Thunder, and the Bulls. Like, we haven't spoken about the Bulls yet. Can we take a side from this Cavs thing to talk about the Bulls? I love the Bulls off season. I thought I look at their team now, and I look at last season and what they were able to drag that team to 48 wins with Noah and Taj Gibson, and they still had Carlos Boozer, who the Lakers' big off-season acquisition, good for them. But I mean, they're bringing in Mirotic. They're like this McDermott kid, like, blew up summer league. They brought in Gasol. I mean, just Gasol and Noah as two of the best passing big men in the game. And I know Gasol's past his prime and blah blah blah, but I mean, even like just last season, his per 36 numbers were some of the best he's had in years. Like, in terms of like just rebounding and scoring, and especially like not being the primary focus on a team. I think he's a really good complementary piece. Like, I was really scared of him going to San Antonio. Like, when people were talking about that, I was like, oh god, like, there's no, we could just forego the season entirely to give the Spurs the championship, because he would be a great player in that system. And then you're bringing in Derrick Rose, who by all accounts is, I know we went through this last summer and we were very excited, and we kept hearing reports of how great he's going to be and how he's still got that first step, and he's still, jumping out of the gym. And
I feel like we've been through this like 4 summers now.
Oh, the sad thing was, I was looking back at something yesterday, and I was doing some research about the USA players, the players in the USA minicamp, and I was like, okay, I'll use their last full season, and I was like, Derrick Rose's last full season was 2011 and 12. Like, that's depressing to me, and even that was the one where he got hurt in the playoffs. So it's like, it just
banged up that whole season.
Yeah, we're being robbed of a large portion of his career, and it sucks.
He really hasn't been fully healthy since his MVP season. He spent that entire lockout year hobbled by various injuries, and Thibodeau was still playing him 40 minutes a night.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm going to keep holding out hope, just because I love basketball, and I love watching like these transcendent players play the game. I mean, that's why I'm so obsessed with it, and why I spend so much time talking about it and writing about it. I don't want to root against the guy. Like, I know a lot of people are really skeptical, I should be skeptical, but I'm an eternal optimist, and I want them to be good again. So I look at that Bulls team and I say, here's a team that basically got rid of Boozer, who was like really like he's gotten to the point in his career where he's not that effective of a player. They bring in this Mirotic guy who's like this international phenom that could be really, really good. McDermott is a good complementary player. Gasol and getting Rose back on top of the 48 win team they had last year, and they didn't really have to give up anything of note. And I think that they're honestly, like, to tie this in with what the initial question about where the Cavs stand. The Cavs are not as good as the Bulls yet.
Wow.
I mean, I don't have any real problem with any of the moves the Bulls made. You know, obviously Powell. I mean, he's a nice player. You know, he's going to help. I mean, they easily have the best passing front court in the league now with Powell and Joakim Noah there. But my beef with the Bulls is that they could have cleared enough space to sign Melo to a big enough contract to bring him in and not start him at $15 million a year. But they didn't go for it because, you know, for all this time, you know, with Jerry Krause as the owner, they've kind of, or Reinsdorf, Krause, whoever it is there, they've kind of acted as like a, you know, almost like a small market team, you know, refusing to go into the luxury tax by any means, and just kind of operating like they're not like one of the 5 highest grossing teams in the league. And they easily could have fit Melo in there on a, you know, a contract that started at $19-20 million if they wanted to. They just didn't go for it. And, you know, they're still, you know, they have, if they get Rose back healthy, which, you know, we all have our fingers crossed for that. You know, we're all hoping that he's there playing, you know, like he was 2 or 3 years ago. But they don't have a second creator yet, so he's still going to be the only guy to create offense. You know, they're going to be cramped in the paint. You know, Powell is a great facilitator, and he's, you know, even playing, you know, at 60% effort last year under D'Antoni in Los Angeles. You know, he still showed he's a great, you know, he can facilitate from the elbow or from the block, and that'll help create offense from them. But they're still, I mean, they're going to really be counting on 2 rookies in McDermott and Mirotic to stretch the floor out for them. And, you know, they kind of play a similar position. I know McDermott's people kind of think that he's going to end up at power forward just because they're not sure he has the athletic ability to guard threes, when, you know, if that might be lazy analysis based on his skin tone. But, you know, if he is going to be stuck playing the 4, along with Mirotic, I mean, they've got 5 guys that need front court minutes with Taj Gibson, Noah, Powell, McDermott, and Mirotic, and they just, or did I say Mirotic twice? Maybe I meant Noah. But they're gonna need to find a way to stretch the floor and create space, you know, for Rose to penetrate, because as it stands now, you know, they still didn't address their need. They needed some help in the backcourt and on the wings, and, you know, Jimmy Butler, for all he is, you know, hopefully he can improve as a player, but, you know, he's not a creator out there, and they're going to be relying on Rose heavily. And, you know, as hard as it is to say, you know, you can't count on him being healthy at this point. You know, if Rose goes down again, what are they going to do? You know, who do they have to create shots for them on the perimeter? Because last year they were brutal to watch. You know, I still have no idea why the Nets tanked out of matching up with them in the first round, because seriously, they could not score last year, and if they missed Rose for any extended period of time, they're still not going to be able to score. You know, they're going to be counting on an inside-out offense that just isn't how the league is working these days.
So where do you see the state of the Eastern Conference right now? I mean, do you think that we're going to see a Cavs Bulls, you know, Eastern Conference Finals, or do you think maybe, you know, Pierce going to Washington kind of, you know, pushes them over the edge and they can make the finals? I mean, you know, where do you kind of stand as far as like your top couple teams?
You know, it's kind of going to be a cluster up there. I see, you know, I've got 8 teams written down here: Indiana, Chicago, Cleveland, Miami, Toronto, Washington, Charlotte, and Atlanta, that can all win, you know, easily win 45 games next year. And I wouldn't be surprised if any of those teams top 50 win. So it's really, I mean, you know, obviously, I think, you know, still, even with my problems with Chicago, I still think they are probably, you know, one of the, you know, the top 2 teams at worst. Keeping health in mind. You know, as long as they're healthy, they're going to be, you know, probably pushing 60 wins. You know, they won 60 games in the 2 years that Rose and Thibodeau were healthy together, I think. So they're going to be up there, but it's going to be a dogfight. That Eastern Conference Finals, whoever it is, whether it's Indiana, Chicago, Cleveland, I wouldn't be surprised if any of those other teams I mentioned snuck in there. Like, it's going to be a fight there. So I mean, it's going to be fun. The last couple of years, the East has been so top heavy that it's been there's been really no point in paying attention to the regular season because we knew who was going to be there at the end. And now it's for the first time basically since the big three came together in Miami, it's kind of a question mark. I don't think any of us would be surprised if there was a surprise team in the Eastern Conference Finals.
I agree completely. I think the cool thing about the East is, yes, it's still far inferior to the West, but at least it's competitive. We're looking at it and we can pick. On any given day, we can kind of say, okay, maybe this team could surprise us. Maybe this team has a chance. And those 8 teams that you mentioned, I would have the same 8. Basically, you got the Cavs coming in, and we got the Nets going out. I think that's fair, and everyone else kind of stays in, and they all kind of got a bit better. I mean, obviously the Bulls got better, the Cavs got a lot better. That's what LeBron James does for you. The Raptors did a really good job. They brought everyone back, basically, and that's I can tell you now as a Canadian and a Raptors fan, having grown up here my whole life, we don't get to keep free agents, and the fact that Kyle Lowry, who's a very underrated player and a star in this league, to sign on, and then to get Patrick Patterson to sign on, and Grievous Vasquez to sign on to be a backup, and that very underrated move to pick up Lou Williams from the Hawks if he ends up being okay coming back from that ACL injury, because a lot of people coming back from ACL injuries, they have a hard time the first season, the second season, they get their legs under them a bit. Like, look at David West a few years ago. I think there's a chance that maybe he comes back to form, and if he does, that's going to be a really underrated pickup. So I like what the Raps did. The Heat are still going to be competitive. Chris Bosh can still be a number 1 option. Dwayne Wade's got more in the tank than we're giving him credit for. Like, I know he's only going to give you 50 games, and he's only going to give, he's deteriorating rapidly, but he still put up good numbers last year. He's still a guy that can put up 25 and 5, and he's got a chip on his shoulder now, and I think the Heat could still be good. The Wiz, of course, got a lot better. The Hawks are going to be a lot better because Horford's going to be back. And they made a couple little decent moves, and I mean, if Thabo Sefolosha can be anything like he was before, last year was a bit of he fell on his face, but I mean, like, Kent Bazemore shown flashes of being a decent role player. They could be okay. The Hornets got a lot better, and the Pacers. I don't know what to do with the Pacers. That's the thing. I feel like there are 3 tiers in the East in the way that I see it. And the Pacers were the biggest one for me, where I was kind of unsure where to put them because they could really fit into any 3 of the groups. Like, I really see the Bulls and the Cavs. Like, I don't feel like the Cavs are done making moves, whether it ends up being Love, which is apparently, looking more and more likely by the day. The Bulls and the Cavs are kind of that top tier. I see the middle tier where you could get a team that surprises you, gets to the Eastern Conference Finals. It could be the Raptors, it could be the Heat, it could be the Wizards. Those are the 3 that I think have the most potential to kind of move up and build on what they did last season. Heat not build on what they did, but still compete. I think I like Josh McRoberts. I like Luol Deng. I think you glue the 2 of them together with Danny Granger, and you might get some of the production you got from LeBron James one way or another. I know that's silly to say; it won't be anywhere close to it, but they're not going to be a terrible team right away. Like some people think, the Wizards got a lot better, and then you got that lower tier with the Hawks and the Hornets, where I think they're better than they were last year. They're good teams. They could surprise us. I wouldn't bet on them more than I'd bet on the Raptors, Heat, or Wizards to get there. And then there's the Pacers. I could easily say that the Pacers, without Lance, like I said, they're giving up a lot of their ball handling, their rebounding, a lot of basically what drove them last year and the year before even. And I think that could drop them down to the Hawks-Hornets range. They could kind of even out to the mean in the Raptors, Heat, Wizards range after being so dominant at the beginning of last season. That could be where they wind up being now without Lance. Or maybe they come back and George takes yet another step, and maybe Hibbert comes back from this work he's doing with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he actually becomes a more consistent player and a decent offensive player, and maybe he picks up some of those rebounds that he figures Lance was stealing from him, and maybe we start to believe in him again, because at the end of the day, he's an elite rim protector. Like we forget this. We sold him out at the end of the season for the meltdown, and we gave it to Noah, and Noah was very deserving of it, but Hibbert is still a fantastic defender. He's basically got that whole verticality thing exists because of him, and he protects the rim better than just about anyone in the league. Like on any given day, he could be the best one out there. Like at the beginning of last season, we were talking more about him and his rim protection than Anthony Davis, and even with his flashy block numbers, there was a time when Hibbert was far and away better than him. And if he can get, I don't know, like that's it with the Pacers team. I feel like I've got my three tiers, but the Pacers could go in any of the three. It really depends. So that's my take on the East anyway. What about at West? Bri, what do you think of how the West is going to break down?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the East is interesting. Like if we're trying to think, like the Spurs just manhandled the Heat last year. So my thoughts are, there's kind of the top teams of the West. The Spurs, the Thunder, the Clips would probably be the three kind of top tier, I guess, of the West. So I think really any of those three could get into the finals. And to be honest, I don't think that any of the East could really even compete at this point. I mean, I think that we think the East is a little bit better right now than it was last year, and last year was pretty awful other than the Heat and the Pacers. But I'm not even sure that the East got much better. I think that we think it did just because
it evened out.
Yeah, I mean, like the best free agent that came from the West to the East is Pau Gasol, and I mean, Pau Gasol is fine, but I mean, it's not like we had a major max guy that came over to the East and really kind of changed the landscape of things. They kind of dispersed around, and they went to things. I mean, the East did a great job in like retaining a bunch of their players. They kept Kyle Lowry, they kept Melo, they kept Chris Bosh. So they kind of kept their stars, but everyone kind of just like played musical chairs as far as where they signed. And it seems a little bit better because, and it probably will be a little bit better because you'll have Horford back from his injury. Hopefully D Rose will be back. So you have a bunch of these potential stars, that are going to be back, which will raise the level of competition. And then you also got the younger guys that hopefully will step up. And then you got Giannis, and you got all the Sixers guys that hopefully will continue to take steps this year. But I'm not really sure I see really any of those teams competing against any of the West teams. I mean, I think that it's kind of going to be probably pretty similar to what we saw this year. I mean, I think it's that top tier, which is the Clippers, Thunder, and Spurs, and then kind of after that you have a bunch of teams that are going to be kind of right there, but maybe missing a piece. The Rockets, we're hoping to get Bosh and get up there. I think the Trailblazers, Lillard takes a step up. Maybe they're missing just one more piece, maybe another defensive big. And then you got kind of that 50-win plateau where you got the Grizzlies and the Mavs and the Suns and maybe the Pelicans. If Davis takes a step up, they can get up to the top upper 40s. But I don't really see any team beating those top three, and then I don't see any East team getting anywhere close. I mean, I think we're going to see a 5-game series in the finals, regardless of what West team makes it.
Yeah, I mean, my thing looking at the West, I'm not really sure that anything's changed much out there. The Rockets obviously got a little bit worse this summer, but they still have Dwight Howard and James Harden there, so they'll still be a playoff team. And the Mavericks might have improved, so they could move up. But I don't see. I mean, it's hard to imagine. I mean, there's no team there that really got any worse. Any like significantly worse. I'm wondering. Because last year we had Phoenix that was so close to being in the playoffs. The Timberwolves obviously had high hopes coming in. I don't really see anybody falling out in the West, that could allow one of those teams to jump in, or a New Orleans type team, or Denver, who Aaron Aflalo seems to think is a championship contender.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's really, the Thunder and Spurs are still going to be right there. Neither of them really did anything but keep the status quo this offseason. But I still see those two duking it out again. In the Western Conference Finals. It's hard to imagine anybody leaping them, just because they're just really. I just didn't see a whole lot of improvement. From any teams that were close to challenging them next year. Unless the Clippers, can take a step forward internally. If Blake Griffin can jump up another level, or if Portland maybe can piece together a little bit more defense next year. But it's still hard to imagine any of them making a move up to the top. And I think the one team out west that really should be kicking themselves is Golden State. I know that they are concerned about breaking apart their defense, but they had a chance. They definitely had a chance to get Kevin Love and a Love Curry duo there. If Monte Ellis and Dirk Nowitzki are devastating on the pick and roll, just imagine what Love and Curry could do. Those are two of the best shooters in the world right there. And if they had those two, I couldn't imagine really anybody guarding them. So I think that's the team that really should, kind of blew their chance this summer to make a move into that top tier in the West. But I just really don't see a whole lot of movement there, just based on the kind of lack of big additions that you've seen in the West.
Yeah, Russ, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly that the top tier in the West is the Spurs, Clippers, and the Thunder, and not necessarily in that order. We'll see how it shakes out, and that they're gonna dominate the East. Well, I don't know if everything falls just right for the Bulls, or if the Cavs are able to make a trade, or Wiggins suddenly becomes this transcendent star in his first year, which isn't likely to happen. A couple things could fall, and we could be saying something differently in a few months. But obviously, those three teams are the contenders. It's really the Spurs to lose, and OKC is the next in line as far as I see it. And the Clippers are there, but they got marginally better. They added Spencer Hawes, which I think is a decent signing and all. But they've still got all that Sterling crap going on around them, and there's talk of boycotts and everything. I don't know if they're ready to dethrone one of the Spurs or OKC, who are like really, really just ready to win a championship next year. And I agree. The Mavs, Warriors, Blazers, Rockets, Grizzlies, Suns, Nuggets, Pelicans, are either of them going to step up and be contenders this year compared to those guys? Probably not. And you can shuffle them up just about any way. I right now I see the Mavs as the closest, knocking on the door after seeing the way that they pushed the Spurs. They were the only ones really to push the Spurs in the playoffs last year, and I think they got better, so maybe they'll be a dark horse contender, who knows, but the Warriors had that missed opportunity. Maybe they'll be a bit better, but they're still kind of the middle ground in the West. The Blazers still can't defend. The Rockets lost their depth. Grizzlies are good, but adding Vince Carter I don't think is going to necessarily move the needle, and it's a shame really, because the Grizzlies are a team that I really wanted to see get far and succeed while they're in this window with Marc Gasol and Z-Bo and Conley and all that. And I just think OKC and the Spurs are in their way. And the Suns didn't do it. They brought in IT2, they brought in Thomas, who we're all a big fan of, like we said. But the Bledsoe situation is kind of weird. And when their three best players are all point guards, I'm sure they'll make it work. But I don't really think that they're ready to make that leap. What if last season was a total fluke? I know, it's hard to say that, but none of us expected them to be that good with the roster that they had, and they were. And maybe they won't be as. Now we're probably going to overrate them for next year and think that they'll be that good again, and maybe they won't be, because they lost Channing Frye, and they still it was only a couple years ago that Miles Plumlee was a cast off, and PJ Tucker was a cast off, and etc. And the Nuggets adding a Aflalo I think was a really good move and all, but it's really hard to say who's going to fall out of the West. We can say that the Pelicans are going to be a lot better, the Nuggets are going to be better, maybe the Suns will keep getting better, but who do you take out? No one really.
Yeah, I agree. And those teams were all up top were all so good. I mean, it kind of comes down to, I mean, matchups of course are everything, but I mean, even a bit of luck is, who's the healthiest team at the end of the year. I still think that if Serge Ibaka had been healthy last year, I think the Thunder would have made the finals. So I mean, you never know. Like we're talking about the Spurs' dominance last year, and if just one little injury goes different and Serge Ibaka plays 2 more games, then all of a sudden we're talking about maybe the Thunder dominance and KD kind of finally taking over and winning his championship, or maybe the Heat, match up really a lot better against the Thunder if they get in, and all of a sudden LeBron stays in Miami because they've won 3 in a row and 3 out of 4, and it's just like this, just little things. It could just be a minute here and there. What if LeBron doesn't cramp up? So it's like when you get to these top tier teams, like usually it's just like 1 or 2 things that really make the difference as far as like who wins the championship, who loses in the first round. It's so like fickle as far as like who can make it.
I completely agree, and I think you really hit it on the head there. And what I hate that comes from that is that when a team just doesn't quite make it, everyone just picks them apart and thinks that they're not going to be good again. They're terrible. They have so many things to deal with, and really it's just one bounce the other way, and we'd be praising them. And I think that's what's happened to OKC the last few years. They've been really picked apart under the microscope, and yes, they have their flaws, and Scott Brooks is not the best coach for that team, and Kendrick Perkins, like, why the heck is he still there, and Derek Fisher got so many minutes, and blah 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 blah, and everyone likes to crap on them for the Harden trade, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, you look back at it, in 2012 they were in the finals, and we didn't know if it was going to be them or the Heat that won, and it ended up being the Heat. But OKC, it was a 5-game series, but OKC gave them, like, it was a competitive series. It was much more competitive than the final 4-1 finishing mark. Then the year after that, they were a super dominant team. Like their regular season that year, a lot of people are forgetting, was just unbelievable. Like they were very clear and obvious title favorites, and then the Russell Westbrook injury happened. And then this year, same thing, still a top offensive, top defensive team in the league, right up there. The Serge Ibaka injury happens, and we weren't that far realistically. Even the year the Mavericks made it to the finals, like a couple bounces either way. Maybe OKC made it to the finals that year. Like we could have literally just had 3 to 4 Thunder championships with a couple little things bouncing different ways, and we'd be talking about them so much differently. We'd be talking about the Spurs being too old. We might have broken up the Heat more. Like right up until that Spurs series, we weren't ready to break up the Heat. No one was ready to tear them apart as much. Like they were saying, like, oh yeah, okay, maybe this year's isn't as strong as next year's. But after we saw the finals, everyone was like, oh, the Heat have so many glaring holes. They have all these problems they have to fix. Blah 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 blah. But like you said, if they had won, we wouldn't have been talking about it as much. Things would have gone a lot differently. And it's just, I don't know. Like sometimes I'm a part of that whole blowing things out of proportion, but at times it gets to me because we're not appreciating these really, really good teams who are doing a lot and who are just on the verge. And a lot of people are criticizing OKC or for not bringing in more talent or whatever like that. But like they have a very talented team. They brought in a good shooter in Anthony Morrow, so there it is. Like I don't know. Anyway, that's a bit of a digression, but you get what I'm saying.
That's all right. Season that ends with you having Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook and Serge Ibaka on your roster isn't really that bad of an offseason. Even if they didn't make any big additions, you still have 3 guys that are 25 and younger. I mean, you're right. I mean, we were pretty close to having 4 straight Thunder Heat finals. I mean, obviously back in 2011, the Thunder were a little bit on the young side, but if Serge Ibaka is healthy, they could be there in the finals. They could have taken out the Spurs because their big advantage over San Antonio has always been their athleticism. San Antonio, they're on a string defensively. They're able to shut down a lot of motion and stuff that a lot of teams throw at them, and then they're able to get open shots just by moving the ball so quickly. But the Thunder can just shut that down because they have such long athletic guys that can get out there. So you're right. I mean, there's no reason to worry, to freak out about the Thunder. Obviously having James Harden would be nice, but they still have all the tools needed to beat San Antonio, and it's going to come down to luck. Even looking at Golden State last year, we could be thinking about them much differently if Bogut hadn't been hurt during the playoffs. He was a big part of their defense, and they still took the Clippers to 7 games. So maybe we'd be talking about, if he was healthy, maybe we'd be talking about breaking up the Clippers and finding some solution there. So it really could, just these tiny little bounces, these nicks and bruises, they can swing entire trajectories of franchises. So it really is. It could come down to just who's healthiest in May and June, next spring. We really have no idea, just because those teams are so good up top. Really, if one of them is healthier than another, that could be the deciding factor.
Yeah, exactly. It really just comes down to small things. Who's the healthiest at the end of the year. We talk about all these roster moves, and who trades for who signs who, and it really, it's, you can sign all the guys you want, but sometimes it's just like, if a guy comes down wrong on his knee, then there goes your playoff chances, regardless of who you signed or how much money you spent on your free agents or whatever. But it'll be definitely be interesting to kind of watch the rest of the off season, and we'll have more podcasts and talk about it through there. Before I let you guys go, I have a game for you. So here's how the game's going to go. I'm going to give you 2 guys, and I want you to tell me last season who had more win shares between the 2 guys. You guys up for it?
Yep, sounds good. Sounds fun.
Okay. All right. So the first duo is Anthony Bennett or Ben Gordon. Who had more win shares? Brett, who do you think?
I'm going to go with Bennett.
Okay.
I feel like you're doing this to spite me, because you like ragging on me about the fact that Bennett had a really bad rookie season, and he's Canadian, and you like to take away the fact that the first overall pick ever to come out of Canada and how bad he was, and I'm mad at you for that. So I'm going to take Anthony Bennett because I want it to be true.
Oh man, I'm sorry to do this to you. So yeah, it was Ben Gordon. Ben Gordon actually, so they were both in the negative. So they were both actually, they're more detrimental to their teams than they were positive. But Anthony Bennett had negative .4 win shares, and Ben Gordon had negative .3 win shares.
The problem is, I knew for a fact that Bennett had negative win shares. That's been held over my head plenty of times. But the fact that Ben Gordon actually had fewer negative win shares surprised me.
A Canadian that had positive win shares, or at least not negative, Russell Peddle.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was right at the 0 line.
My win share total was better than Anthony Bennett's. You're right.
There you go. Yeah, you can take that one home.
He's making $4.5 million a year now.
Yeah. Man, we need to get a pay increase.
Yeah.
Okay, so my next one, Kendrick Perkins or Jan Vesely.
I feel like this is. It's got to be Jan Vesely. It feels like a trick because Jan barely did anything, but Perkins has been, like, as far as advanced stats go, he's bad. He registers bad and poorly in a lot of things, and I've got to assume that using Jan Vesely, the guy who's basically his best. The best thing we know him for is hot girlfriend, and now he's not even in the NBA anymore. So I bet it's Jan Vesely, and you're doing this just to screw with us.
Yeah, Perkins is just such a damaging player offensively. He travels every time he touches the ball, whether it's caught or not. He takes jump shots that are so far out of his range. He's just so damaging in all facets of offense, other than his screen setting, which doesn't show up in any of the statistical measures. So Vesely, he might be terrible, but at least he isn't out there ruining everything. He's just a non-factor. So I'm going to say that Vesely was higher as well.
That's yeah, you guys got that. So Perkins had .8 win shares, and Vesely had 1.6 win shares. So both actually significantly better than Anthony Bennett or Ben Gordon. So that's something. All right, moving on. Kyrie Irving or John Wall, Brett? Who you got?
I'm going to go with John Wall. I have a pretty good feeling that Wall's defensive win shares are going to be quite a bit higher than Irving's, taking into account how terrible the Cavs were defensively and how much of a part of that Irving was, just being a complete turnstile at the point. And Wall's assist numbers I know are better too. So I'm assuming that's going to play a big factor. So I'm definitely going to go with John Wall here.
I'm going to backtrack 1 second before I give you an answer because I know the answer anyway, so I'm not going to be able to talk about it. But the thing I wanted to mention about Perkins that everyone overlooks. Do you want to take a guess at how well he protected the rim last year? Like, take a guess at the percentage that the players shot around the rim against him. Like being good being like a little less than 50.
I'm gonna guess. So you're saying he was a good rim protector last year, or are you asking us to wager a guess here?
Wager a guess. What do you think? What do you think?
I guess 54%.
I'm gonna say under that. I'm gonna go about 45.
41.2.
Jeez.
So
Okay.
he sets picks and he protects the rim. He's not 3.5. And I mean, like for playing less than 20 minutes per game, not terrible. It's something. It's something. I like. I'm not a Kendrick Perkins apologist by any means, but
Hey, hold on, hope, Russ.
yeah,
Take what you can get.
That's it. But anyway, back to your question. I know it simply because on our website yesterday, I did a little breakdown of the Team USA scrimmage teams, and I ranked them. Like I put all their win share per 48 minutes. I put those numbers together and averaged them to pick the best team. So I actually saw the win shares for Kyrie versus John Wall, and I know John Wall is 3.2 to 3.
3.2 to 3 from last year? So John Wall won, but
John Wall, Kyrie had 3 and John Wall had 3.2.
Oh, I have 7.9 to 6.7.
What?
Yeah. Weird.
Wait. Never mind. I got that mixed up with Nerd. Or the Nerd score on Numberfire.
Numberfire, yeah.
Check out numberfire.com, by the way. But anyway, yeah, our Nerd score.
There you go. Yeah. All right, so Kyrie or Isaiah Thomas?
Isaiah Thomas.
Yeah, I think this one's pretty clear. Isaiah had a real similar stat line, but I think his percentages all around were a little better. I'm gonna go with Isaiah as well.
He was one of the league leaders in like PER and win shares, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean he was up there for point guards for sure. He was up at 7.7, which is right where John Wall was really.
Yeah.
John Wall was 7.9. Kyrie was below 7. So it's just interesting, kind of like people's perception of Kyrie versus all the other young point guards. I know Brett, you were going to write about this.
Yeah, Brian. I feel like every podcast you're going to find a way to point out young point guards that are better statistically than Kyrie.
Yep, I'm just going to make it a segment from here on out. Just like
you're going to get some hate mail from Cleveland.
Bring it on. JaVale McGee or Hasheem Thabeet?
JaVale McGee. He didn't play much, but I know Hasheem Thabeet did not accomplish anything. I can tell you for sure. So it's got to be McGee.
Yeah. Brett.
Yeah. McGee really wasn't all that good to start the year, so I'm just going to swing for the fences and say Thabeet, even though he barely played and barely registered any impact.
It was Hasheem. Hasheem had 0 win shares, but JaVale was at negative 0.1. Ouch. And then my last one before I let you guys go, Tony Roten or any player.
I'll go with any player.
Yep. If you guess any player, or just really anyone in the world, you would get that one correct because he was.
Oh, poor Tony Roten.
He was the worst. He was at negative 0.9 win share, so he cost the Sixers about one loss.
He also, but speaking back in the number fire, he also had the worst nerd of any player in the entire NBA last season. I can't remember what it was, but it's like -9 or something close to that.
I think the Sixers had 3 or 4 players in like the bottom 10 of that nerd.
Yeah, basically, I think they're players with the five most minutes out of played for the whole season were all in the bottom 20 of the entire league. I did a thing on Evan Turner a couple of weeks ago, and that came up. It's funny, these conversations we have. I think we can tie absolutely everything we talk about into an article that one of the 3 of us have written.
It's true.
It's a good plug for the site.
Yeah.
So go read all of our old stuff.
Yeah, true that. We got a lot of stuff coming out on the Stretch Zero. I mean, it's brand new, so we, just launched this week. So, we're kind of learning, exactly what we're going to write, what kind of content we want to put out. We know we want it to be analytical. We know we want to put out podcasts, and we'd really love to hear from you guys. We'd love to, make it a community type thing and hear you guys' questions and talk about it. We'll have a bunch of guests on and all sorts of stuff. But thanks for listening. We'll have to do it soon. I'm Brian Mears. We got Russell Peddle and Brett Wiseman. Thanks, guys, for joining me. It was fun.
No problem, Brian. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. You had a great time.
All right, see you guys.
See ya.